Rome, 48 AD, the most powerful empire on earth. And at its center, in the marble halls of the Palatine Palace, a woman is about to be executed. Not on the battlefield, not in the arena, but in her own garden, surrounded by roses, while her husband, the Emperor of Rome, signs her death warrant. Her name was Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, mother of the future emperor, and according to every Roman historian who wrote about her, the most sexually depraved woman who ever lived. They said she turned the imperial palace into a brothel, that she competed with Rome's most famous prostitute to see who could sleep with more men in a single night, that she forced senators to have sex with her while their colleagues watched, that she held orgies in the emperor's own bed while he slept in another room, that she married another man in a public ceremony while still married to the emperor, and that when they finally killed her, they found her in the arms of yet another lover. But here's what they don't tell you in history class. Every single one of those accusations came from men who wanted her dead, men who benefited from her execution, men who needed a story so horrifying that no one would question why they murdered the empress without a trial. So which stories are true? Which are lies? And what really happened in that palace? Today, you're going to learn 5 sexual atrocities attributed to Empress Messalina. 5 acts so shocking that Roman historians were afraid to write down all the details. 5 reasons why she was executed without ever being allowed to defend herself. And I warn you, what you're about to hear will destroy everything you thought you knew about ancient Rome. Because this isn't a story about a sex-crazed empress. This is a story about how powerful men use sexual accusations to destroy powerful women. This is a story about how rumor becomes history. This is a story about how an entire empire conspired to erase a woman from existence and replace her with a monster. Before we begin, understand who Messalina really was. Born around 20 AD into one of Rome's oldest families, she was everything a Roman noblewoman should be: beautiful, connected, ambitious. At 15 years old, she was married to Claudius, a man 30 years her senior, a man everyone thought was an idiot, a man who stammered and drooled and limped, a man no one expected would ever become emperor. And then, in 41 AD, everything changed. The Praetorian Guard murdered Emperor Caligula. They found Claudius hiding behind a curtain in the palace, and they made him emperor. Not because he was qualified, not because he was respected, but because he was the last adult male in the imperial family still alive. Suddenly, Messalina wasn't just a noblewoman. She was the Empress of Rome, the most powerful woman in the world, and she was 21 years old. That's when the rumors started. That's when the accusations began. And that's when powerful men realized that this young empress wasn't going to play by their rules. What you're about to hear are 5 atrocities that destroyed her. But as you listen, ask yourself this question. If these stories are true, why was she never put on trial? Why was she never allowed to speak in her own defense? Why was she executed in secret, in a garden, with no witnesses except the men who wanted her dead? The answer to that question is more terrifying than any of the atrocities themselves. If you want to know the truth that Rome tried to bury, subscribe right now and turn on all notifications. Because YouTube doesn't want you to see this. The algorithm buries content that exposes how history is written by the victors. But you deserve to know what really happened. Hit that subscribe button, click the bell, and let's uncover the truth about the most hated woman in Roman history. The first accusation is the one that appears in every history book, the one that defines Messalina in the popular imagination. The story that she left the imperial palace in disguise, went to a brothel in the slums of Rome, and worked as a prostitute under a fake name. According to the Roman historian Pliny the Elder, Messalina would wait until Emperor Claudius fell asleep, Then she would put on a blonde wig to disguise her famous dark hair. She would wrap herself in a common cloak, and she would slip out of the palace with a single female slave as escort. She would walk through the dark streets of Rome, past the sleeping guards, past the shuttered shops, down into the Suburra, the slum district where the poorest Romans lived. And there, in a brothel lit by oil lamps and reeking of cheap wine, she would work as a prostitute until dawn. The historians claim she did this not for money. The empress had unlimited wealth. She did it for pleasure, for the thrill of degradation, for the excitement of being used by men who had no idea they were having sex with the Empress of Rome. Pliny even gives her prostitute name, Lysiska, the she-wolf. And he claims she was so insatiable that she was always the last prostitute working, that when the brothel closed for the night and the other women went home, Messalina would still be there, begging for more clients. But here's what Pliny doesn't tell you. He wasn't alive when this supposedly happened. He was born in 23 AD. Messalina died in 48 AD. Pliny would have been a child, living hundreds of miles from Rome. He never met her. He never saw the palace. He never interviewed anyone who witnessed these events. So where did he get this story? From other historians. Historians who got it from rumors. Rumors that started circulating after Messalina was already dead, after she could no longer defend herself, after the men who killed her needed to justify why they executed an empress without a trial. Think about the logistics. The Empress of Rome doesn't just walk out of the palace. The imperial residence was guarded by the Praetorian Guard, elite soldiers who were personally loyal to the emperor. Every entrance was watched. Every visitor was recorded. The idea that Messalina could slip past them night after night, for months or years, without anyone noticing, strains credibility. And even if she could escape the palace, she couldn't escape her face. Messalina's image was on coins throughout the empire. Statues of her stood in temples and forums. Every Roman citizen knew what the empress looked like. A blonde wig wouldn't fool anyone who actually looked at her face. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that it's true. Let's say Messalina really did work as a prostitute. The question becomes, why? What would drive the most powerful woman in the world to degrade herself in the slums? The official answer, according to the historians, is simple. She was insane. She was depraved. She was driven by uncontrollable lust. But that explanation doesn't make sense, because if Messalina wanted sexual variety, she had unlimited access to men in the palace. Senators, generals, gladiators, anyone she wanted. She didn't need to risk her life sneaking into a brothel. Unless the story isn't about sex at all. Unless it's about something else. Unless it's about power. Because here's what the historians also tell us. Messalina didn't just have sex with random men. She gathered information. She identified which senators were secretly disloyal to Claudius. She learned which generals were plotting coups. She discovered which wealthy Romans were hiding assets to avoid taxes. And then she used that information to destroy them. She would accuse them of treason, have them executed, and seize their property. Ancient sources claim she was responsible for hundreds of executions, that she accumulated a personal fortune larger than the imperial treasury itself, that she wielded more real power than her stuttering, seemingly incompetent husband. So maybe the brothel story isn't about sexual depravity. Maybe it's about intelligence gathering. Maybe Messalina really did go into the Suburra, not to work as a prostitute, but to spy, to listen to conversations in taverns, to learn what ordinary Romans were saying about the emperor, to identify threats before they could materialize. And maybe that's why the story was rewritten, because the empress was a master spy who protected the emperor doesn't justify executing her. But the empress was a depraved whore does. That's the first atrocity, or the first lie, depending on who you believe. If you're still watching, you've just learned something that isn't in any history textbook. The story you've been told about Messalina might be propaganda written by the men who murdered her. Subscribe right now if you want to know the truth. Click that bell icon, because the next atrocity is even more disturbing, and the evidence is even more questionable. Hit the like button if you think sexual accusations are still used to destroy powerful women today. Because what happened to Messalina 2,000 years ago is still happening right now. The second accusation is the most graphic, the most detailed, and the most obviously fabricated. According to Pliny the Elder, Messalina challenged Scylla, Rome's most famous prostitute, to a competition. They would see who could have sex with more men in a 24-hour period. Pliny claims the competition took place in the imperial palace itself. That Messalina arranged for a steady stream of men, volunteers and slaves, to be brought to a private chamber. That she had sex with them one after another, keeping count, while Scylla did the same in another room. And according to Pliny, Messalina won. She had sex with 25 men in a single day and night. Scylla could only manage 23. Messalina was declared the victor. And Pliny claims she celebrated by having the two losers, men who had apparently failed to satisfy her, executed. This story appears in almost every account of Messalina's life. It's the detail that shocks students in history classes. It's the anecdote that appears in documentaries and popular histories. It's treated as historical fact. But let's examine it closely. First, the source. Pliny the Elder, again. The same man who wasn't in Rome when this supposedly happened. The same man who was a child when Messalina died. The same man who admits in his own writing that he's repeating rumors and gossip, not eyewitness testimony. Second, the logistics. 25 men in 24 hours. That's one man roughly every hour, with no breaks for food, sleep, or recovery, for an entire day and night, while somehow maintaining an accurate count and ensuring none of the participants talked about this afterwards. Third, the location. The Imperial Palace, the most heavily guarded building in Rome. Every visitor was screened, every entrance was watched. The idea that 24 men could be brought in for a sex competition without the emperor finding out is absurd. Unless Claudius knew. Unless he approved. Unless this whole story is not about Messalina's depravity, but about the emperor's weakness. Because that's the real message of this anecdote. Not that Messalina was sexually insatiable, but that Claudius was so pathetic, so incompetent, so unmanly, that his own wife could hold a public orgy in his palace and he either didn't know or didn't care. That's what this story is really about. Humiliating Claudius, proving that he wasn't fit to rule, demonstrating that the imperial household was in chaos, building a case for why he needed to be controlled, manipulated, or replaced. And the historians who recorded this story? They all wrote after Claudius was dead, after his reputation had been thoroughly destroyed by the next emperor, Nero, after it was safe to say anything about him without facing consequences. But let's dig deeper, because there's something else strange about this story: the punishment. Messalina supposedly executed 2 men for failing to satisfy her. But Roman law didn't allow empresses to order executions. That power belonged to the emperor alone, or to the Senate, or to the Praetorian prefect. An empress could request an execution, she could suggest it, she could manipulate her husband into ordering it, but she couldn't do it herself. So if this story is true, it means Claudius signed the death warrants for 2 men whose only crime was participating in his wife's sex competition. Does that make sense? Would any emperor publicly admit that his wife held an orgy and then officially execute the participants? Or does it make more sense that this detail was invented later, to make Messalina seem not just sexually depraved, but also sadistic and murderous? There's one more possibility. Maybe something did happen. Maybe Messalina did have multiple sexual partners. Maybe she was trying to get pregnant, because that was an empress's primary duty: produce heirs, ensure the succession, secure the dynasty. Messalina had 2 children with Claudius: Octavia, born in 39 or 40 AD, and Britannicus, born in 41 AD, right after Claudius became emperor. After that, no more children, for 7 years, in a world without reliable contraception, in an age when women often had 6, 8, 10 children. Was Messalina trying to have more children? Was she desperate to produce another son, to secure her position and protect her existing children? Was she doing what many royal women throughout history have done, taking lovers in secret to get pregnant when her elderly husband couldn't perform? If that's true, then the sex competition story takes on a different meaning. It's not about depravity. It's about desperation. It's about a woman trying to survive in a system where her only value was her ability to produce male heirs. And it's about historians who turned that desperation into a pornographic anecdote. Comment below with one word: propaganda or truth. Do you think these stories about Messalina are historical fact or political character assassination? And hit the like button right now if you think we need to question what we're taught about women in history. Because every like tells YouTube that people want the truth, not comfortable lies. What's coming next is the darkest accusation of all, and it's the one that finally got Messalina killed. The third accusation is the most politically dangerous. And unlike the first 2, this one appears in multiple sources, with specific names, dates, and details. According to Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, Messalina used sex as a weapon. She would identify wealthy senators or successful generals. She would seduce them or have them brought to her chambers. And then she would use the affair to blackmail them, extort them, or destroy them. Tacitus gives specific examples. Gaius Appius Silanus, a distinguished senator, was seduced by Messalina and then executed on false charges of plotting against Claudius. Decimus Valerius Asiaticus, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, owner of the famous gardens of Lucullus, was accused of adultery with Messalina and forced to commit suicide. His property was seized and added to the imperial holdings. Valerius Asiaticus is particularly important because we know he existed. We know he was executed. We know his property was confiscated. And we know that Messalina wanted his gardens. Multiple sources confirm she asked Claudius for permission to take them. So the question isn't whether Asiaticus was destroyed. The question is why. The official story is that Messalina seduced him, grew bored of him, and then had him killed to steal his property. But there's another version. Asiaticus was not just wealthy, he was popular. He had commanded legions. He had been consul twice. He had the money, the military connections, and the political support to threaten Claudius's hold on power. And he had motive. Asiaticus had been a close friend of Caligula. When Caligula was assassinated, many people suspected Asiaticus was involved in the conspiracy. If he had helped kill one emperor, he could kill another, especially an emperor as weak and unpopular as Claudius. So, was Messalina protecting her husband by eliminating a potential threat? Or was she destroying an innocent man to steal his gardens? The ancient historians want you to believe the second story, but they have a motive to lie. Because if Messalina was actually good at her job, if she was actually identifying and neutralizing real threats to the emperor, then executing her becomes much harder to justify. The pattern repeats, over and over. In the years between 41 and 48 AD, dozens of wealthy, powerful men were executed or forced to commit suicide. All of them accused of adultery with Messalina. All of them, conveniently, men who opposed Claudius's policies or threatened his rule. All of them stripped of their property before they died.
Was this sex-fueled tyranny? Or was it political house-cleaning with a sexual veneer? Because there's a pattern here that the ancient historians don't want you to see. Every single man Messalina supposedly seduced and destroyed was someone who threatened the emperor. Not a single one was a random lover chosen for pleasure. Every victim was strategic. But here's where it gets darker. Because some of these men weren't seduced at all. They were forced. According to Tacitus, Messalina would send imperial guards to arrest men and bring them to the palace. She would tell them they had been chosen for the empress's favor. And they would be given a choice: sleep with the empress or be accused of plotting against the emperor. Think about that. You're a senator. Armed men show up at your door in the middle of the night. You're taken to the palace. You're brought before the empress.
And she tells you that if you refuse her, you'll be executed for treason. What do? You comply. You have no choice. And then, later, when it's politically convenient, you're accused of adultery and executed anyway. Your property is seized. Your family is disgraced. And history records that you were killed because you had an affair with the empress. That's not sexual depravity. That's systematic intimidation. That's using sex as a tool of terror. That's forcing men into compromising positions and then using those positions to destroy them. It's not about lust. It's about power. It's about control. It's about eliminating threats while creating a narrative that makes the victims look guilty. And it worked. For 7 years, Messalina helped Claudius consolidate power. She identified threats. She gathered intelligence. She eliminated rivals. She accumulated wealth that could be used to pay the Praetorian Guard and secure their loyalty. She did everything a Roman empress was supposed to do to protect her family and maintain the dynasty. But she made one fatal mistake. She became more powerful than the men who served her husband. The freedmen, Narcissus and Pallas, who actually ran the empire. The Praetorian commanders, who controlled the military. The senators, who resented being dominated by a woman. They needed her gone. But they couldn't just execute an empress. They needed a story so horrifying that no one would question her death. They needed accusations so shocking that Claudius would sign her death warrant without hesitation. That's where the fourth atrocity comes in. We're more than halfway through this story, and if you're still watching, you understand that history isn't about truth. It's about who tells the story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Post it on social media. Send it to a friend. Because this is the kind of history they don't teach in schools. And the only way we break through the sanitized version is by spreading the truth ourselves. Comment below and tell me which atrocity shocks you most. I read every single comment. Your engagement keeps this content alive. Now, let's talk about the accusation that destroyed Messalina. The fourth accusation is the one that sealed Messalina's fate. According to every ancient historian, in the autumn of 48 AD, while Emperor Claudius was away from Rome, Messalina married another man in a public ceremony. His name was Gaius Silius. He was young, he was handsome, he was one of the most distinguished senators in Rome. And according to the historians, Messalina was so obsessed with him that she committed the ultimate crime: bigamy, treason, public humiliation of the emperor. Tacitus describes the scene in detail. Messalina held the wedding in her own gardens. She invited guests. She wore bridal robes. There were witnesses. There was a formal contract. There were religious rites. It was, in every legal sense, a real marriage, while she was still married to the Emperor of Rome. And according to Tacitus, Silius knew exactly what he was doing. He knew this was treason. He knew this would end in death. But he agreed anyway, because Tacitus claims refusing the empress was more dangerous than marrying her. When Claudius returned to Rome and learned what had happened, he was devastated. The freedman Narcissus took control. He convinced the emperor that Messalina and Silius were planning a coup, that they were going to murder Claudius and install Silius as emperor with Messalina as his empress.
that the marriage was not a scandal, it was a declaration of war. Claudius signed the death warrants. The Praetorian Guard was mobilized. Silius was arrested and executed immediately. Messalina was found in her gardens. She tried to write a letter begging for mercy, but the commander of the guard, following Narcissus's orders, killed her before she could finish it. No trial, no defense, no chance to explain. And just like that, the Empress of Rome was dead, killed in her own garden, while holding a pen. But here's the problem. This story doesn't make sense. First, the marriage itself. Roman law was clear. A woman could not be married to two men at once. Any ceremony performed while her first marriage was valid would be legally void, meaningless. Silius would have known this. Messalina would have known this. Every single guest at the wedding would have known this. So why do it? Why perform a ceremony that had no legal weight? Why commit treason in front of witnesses? Why give your enemies the perfect excuse to kill you? Unless it wasn't a wedding, unless it was something else, unless the whole story was invented or distorted to justify what happened next. Let's look at the sources. Tacitus, writing 60 years after the event. Suetonius, writing 70 years later. Cassius Dio, writing 150 years later. None of them were alive when this happened. All of them got their information from earlier sources, sources that no longer exist, sources we can't verify. And all of them write from the perspective of the Senate, the institution that benefited most from Messalina's death, because her execution cleared the way for Claudius to marry his niece, Agrippina. And Agrippina brought with her a son from a previous marriage, a boy named Nero, who would become the next emperor, replacing Messalina's son, Britannicus. So the senatorial sources had every reason to justify Messalina's execution. They needed the story to be so outrageous that no one would question why she was killed without a trial, why her children were disinherited, why her entire family was disgraced. What if the truth is simpler? What if there was no wedding? What if Messalina attended a religious festival, a ceremony in honor of Bacchus, the god of wine and ecstasy? These festivals involved ritual performances, symbolic marriages between celebrants and the god, costumed pageantry.
What if Messalina participated in one of these rites, with Silius playing the role of Bacchus, and someone reported it to Narcissus as a literal marriage? Or what if there was a conspiracy, but Messalina wasn't part of it? What if Silius was planning a coup, and he tried to implicate Messalina to give himself legitimacy? What if he told people the Empress supported him, and she found out too late to stop him? Or, darkest possibility, what if Narcissus invented the whole thing? He had the most to gain from Messalina's death. As Claudius's chief secretary, he controlled access to the emperor. He controlled information. He could tell Claudius anything, and the emperor would believe him, especially if Claudius was away from Rome and couldn't verify the story independently. Think about how it happened. Claudius was at the port of Ostia, miles from Rome. Narcissus brought him the news. Narcissus showed him the evidence. Narcissus convinced him to sign the death warrants. Narcissus sent the soldiers. Narcissus made sure Messalina was killed before she could speak to her husband, before she could defend herself, before she could present her version of events. And after she was dead, Narcissus was the one who told the story. He was the one who explained to the Senate what had happened. He was the one who shaped the narrative that would be passed down to the historians. He was the one who turned a political execution into a justified response to an unforgivable scandal. Messalina never got to tell her side. She was killed before she could write her letter, before she could reach her husband, before she could explain. And without her voice, all that remains is the voice of her enemies. That's the fourth atrocity. Not what Messalina did, but what was done to her. She was erased, silenced, turned into a monster. And history accepted the story without question. The fifth atrocity didn't happen in 48 AD. It's still happening now, 2,000 years later.
The complete erasure of who Messalina really was, and the replacement of her story with propaganda. After Messalina was executed, Emperor Claudius ordered her name removed from all public inscriptions. Her statues were torn down. Her images were chiseled off coins. Every record of her existence was systematically destroyed. Within months, it was as if she had never lived. Her children were allowed to survive, but only barely. Britannicus, the emperor's son and legal heir, was pushed aside in favor of Agrippina's son Nero. Octavia, Messalina's daughter, was married to Nero in a calculated political move, and both children were forbidden from ever speaking their mother's name in public. 5 years later, when Claudius died, most Romans believed he had been poisoned by Agrippina. Nero became emperor. Britannicus was murdered within a year. Octavia was exiled and executed a few years after that. Messalina's entire bloodline was extinguished. And the histories were written. Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio.
All writing decades or centuries after the fact. All relying on sources created by the people who killed Messalina. All presenting her as the most depraved woman in Roman history, a monster, a nymphomaniac, a murderer, a traitor. And for 2,000 years, that's the story the world has believed. Messalina the whore, Messalina the adulteress, Messalina the villain. She appears in plays and operas and paintings and films, always as a symbol of sexual depravity and female evil. No one asks whether the stories are true. No one questions why a woman was executed without a trial. No one wonders why her accusers were the same men who benefited from her death. No one considers that maybe, just maybe, she was a competent empress doing a difficult job in a brutal system, and she was destroyed by men who couldn't tolerate a powerful woman. That erasure is the real atrocity, not what Messalina supposedly did, but what was done to her memory. The systematic destruction of her story and the replacement of that story with a lie so complete that even now, even after modern historians have pointed out the inconsistencies and biases in the ancient sources, the popular image of Messalina remains unchanged. She is still the nymphomaniac empress, the prostitute in the palace, the woman who destroyed Rome through her uncontrollable lust. And that lie serves a purpose. It warns women what happens when they seek power. It tells them that ambition in a woman is indistinguishable from depravity. It reinforces the message that women who step outside their assigned roles will be destroyed and remembered as monsters. So what's the truth about Valeria Messalina? The honest answer is we'll never know. The real woman is lost behind 2,000 years of propaganda, destroyed evidence, and political bias. We'll never hear her voice. We'll never read her defense. We'll never know what she actually did or why she did it. But we can do something else. We can recognize that the story we've been told is not objective history. It's a narrative constructed by her enemies. We can see the patterns, the same accusations used against every powerful woman in history: sexual depravity, manipulation, hysteria, madness. The same tools used to justify destroying women who threaten male power. We can question, we can investigate, we can refuse to accept comfortable lies just because they've been repeated for centuries. And we can remember that history is written by the victors, and the victors have every reason to make their victims look like monsters. If you've made it this far, you've just spent 38 minutes learning how history is manipulated, how sexual accusations are weaponized, how powerful women are erased and replaced with caricatures. Here's what you need to do right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications. Click that bell icon, because content like this is exactly what YouTube tries to suppress. They don't want you questioning official narratives. They don't want you seeing the patterns, but you deserve the truth. Second, smash the like button.
Every like tells the algorithm that people want real history, not sanitized propaganda. It helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Third, share this everywhere. Post it on social media, send it to friends, email it to your history teacher. Because the only way we break through 2,000 years of lies is by spreading the truth ourselves. Fourth, comment the word erased if you think Messalina was a victim of character assassination. Or comment guilty if you think the accusations were justified. Tell me which story shocked you most. I read every single comment, and your engagement keeps this channel alive. Next video, we're going even deeper into the life of Agrippina the Younger, the woman who replaced Messalina, the woman who married her own uncle, the woman who murdered her husband and installed her son as emperor, the woman who makes Messalina look innocent. You won't want to miss it. I'll see you there.